So again, on behalf of Michelin, I'm very pleased that all of you were able to join us here this morning. I would like to thank the Automotive Press Association for the opportunity to be here for the 13th consecutive year that we've had this event. Since the founding of our company, Michelin, over 125 years ago, by Edouard Michelin, an artist, and André Michelin, the engineer, it's been very critical for us and very evident that both innovation and design play a role in our company as well as in society. Competition is also a very important part of our heritage, and that dates back to 1891 when Charles Tarrant won the famous Paris to Brest bicycle race, 1,200 kilometers. He won that race by more than 9 hours thanks to the innovative Michelin demountable tire, the removable tire. I'll start next with introducing the panel and our moderator for today's discussion. First, Mr. Dave Marek, who's Executive Creative Director at Honda R&D for North America and a longtime member of the Michelin Challenge Design jury. We've been pleased to have him with us for many, many years. Mr. Doug Fehan, who's Program Manager for Corvette Racing, 8-time winning team at Le Mans and the current defending GT Class champion.
That's it.
And Mr. Ben Bowlby, who's motor racing designer and innovator and owner of Ben Bowlby Racing, LLC. And then our moderator today, who many of you also know, Mr. Ben Ebel, who's design coordinator for original equipment Michelin North America and co-chair of the Michelin Challenge Design team. So, Ben, I thank you very much for moderating for us today, and I will hand it off to you.
Well, good morning, both to our panel and to Tom and to all of you who are in attendance. We want to thank you guys. This is always one of the high points of my calendar year. I always like to hear what the smart guys in the room have to say about it. We've had a lot of really fantastic themes last year, from Ability for All, electrification, lightweighting, and our themes always seem to really resonate in the industry. And one of the main reasons we believe that to be true is that the final say on what the theme is going to be are these guys. It's the jury. It's the industry professionals who give us their feedback and let us know what they find relevant right now. So there's a French word which is bum rushed, and this year we got bum rushed by the jury. That's true. That's true. By the jury whenever they met we think they met in a bar, and whenever we said, "How about anything other than Le Mans 2030?" and they started a sit-in or something, but it was very obvious that this was the theme that they wanted to hear about. And we have such a long history, and like I'm sure Chris can tell you if you have a chance to talk to him, in success at Le Mans and success in motorsports, that it really seemed like a natural fit. So,
can I interject?
Of course.
We actually said, where do you want to have the event next year? Because we were doing them at museums. So we were at Mullins Museum, and we were talking about the Peterson. And so that's when the conversation that guys came up with Fireball. It was like, we should go to Le Mans. And then we should do Le Mans. And then it was just like, you got bum rushed.
Yeah, we got bum rushed there. So, well, however it happened, thank you.
You're
we're very pleased.
Thank you.
And it seems like our entries or the people that are entering are very pleased. So brings us to our first question, Dave. You're a longtime member of the Challenge Design jury. You obviously helped choose. As a designer, what makes Le Mans interesting to you? What is it that holds such a lure to you as a design leader?
Everything. I think, we've talked about this before, but literally I grew up loving all kinds of racing. And I always gravitated to the better looking cars, I guess, because as a designer when you're young, you have influences, and one we've talked about a lot was 917. I love that car. And I think that the beauty of it and the timing of it for me growing up, to understand the aesthetic of it, that you could win a race with something so beautiful, always resonated with designers. And you think, then it's the technology. So all the technology that goes into those cars. And you think about Le Mans today, it's ridiculous technology. But it truly relates back to a production car. My influence is going forward, and that leads to why do I work at Honda? Why am I Acura Global Creative Director? Is because Mr. Honda always wanted to race, and racing was part of our heritage all the way through. Still is. And I think that I personally am really involved with the racing of Honda Motor Company. But as well as all the others, I follow everybody. I follow Corvette. I mean, we were talking earlier about aesthetics, and I told her earlier that I think the Corvette is extremely iconic right now because of the color and the style of the car, and you know when you see it. Well, and the victories, it doesn't hurt. But
doesn't hurt, right?
But because you get exposure. But I'm the most competitive person on earth. But when it comes to a pretty car, it didn't have to win. It just had to look great. It just sit there and go, oh my God, this thing's beautiful. And that's why in the Michelin Challenge that I think if we can combine, these guys are all designers, they probably want to go and be a design or in a company, but if you could be an engineer or have some idea of what a designer is not a guy that just sketches a car. He has this vision of what he wants to make. And involved in that is how to make it, not just what it looks like. So I think that going back to the Le Mans aspect is, it was kind of a run what you brung, but they all were amazing. They looked beautiful. There was competition between the factories, but the cars were so pretty that you couldn't help but find the aesthetic.
Do you guys, I mean, from a technical standpoint, was there a car that inspired you guys? I know Dave will often answer a question because 917. Is there a car that you guys can think about that inspired you to go down the paths that you guys have chosen for your careers?
Well, from a GM perspective, obviously, when you look at the ground that Corvette broke from its inception with a composite body in 1953, it was designed, and part of Zora's goal, aside from the racing, was to try new things, to look at new technologies, to be visionary in the overall look of the vehicle, the fact that it had two seats. So it was so multifaceted. As a kid growing up, I think, and most of you probably felt the same way, the Corvette was what we refer to as an aspirational vehicle. You saw it, it was cool, but maybe it wasn't exactly practical. Maybe you couldn't afford it, but you loved it, you liked it, and someday you always hoped you'd have one. And growing up for me, that's pretty much where I was. So when opportunities presented itself to put together a program utilizing Corvette as a global race entity, that was a difficult thing for me to say no to.
Yeah, I bet.
Racing is truly a bad drug. I've sworn off at 3 different times in my career, and I refuse to go to rehab any longer.
How about you, Ben? Was there one that sticks out in your mind?
In point of fact, there is one that sticks in my mind, and again, it actually relates to very early childhood experiences, and the GT40 for me was the it car of the era when I was just becoming conscious of cars. And growing up in London, I think I saw one, and it was, I think one of the famous disc jockeys owned a GT40, and it was a big deal. And Dan Gurney and AJ Foyt winning that extraordinary '67 race was just a car that was. It actually was an incredibly beautiful car. I thought it was beautiful. And in my life, I've been a designer of cars that go fast, typically. And I think that often we have to reject the need for it to be styled first. But have you noticed how quick cars somehow organically look right? Yeah. And I think that the GT40 absolutely looked right. Yep. And it changed, it was a Le Mans winner, and it set a new benchmark. And I think that, from a design standpoint, I have a lot of respect for the designers who actually create the visual image of a vehicle. And then, I feel like working the engineering into that is still very important to marry these two things. Mm-hmm. And so I take the visual styling design of the car incredibly seriously. I think it's very important.
I sat through A Man and a Woman. You remember that movie? Just awful movie for me. I'm 12, 13, I don't know how old I was, but it had a GT40 in it. Yeah. So I sat through it with my mother to see the GT40. It's in it for like 5 minutes, but I didn't care. It was like, well, look at that. Yeah. So I understand. But I think that's what you do. You can marry the form and function with the aesthetic. I'm sure you're going to get to current cars or whatever, but I think there's some aesthetic, but I think the differentiation, there needs to be a little more iconicness to it, I think, in the P1 cars, for sure. They're awesome.
I think we all talk about cars from a particular era. Like the 962 is one that I'll always remember. As we look at technology advancing, Doug, in your world, what has happened over the last 15 years that you think has allowed you guys, or you have persevered against, to be as successful as the Corvette team has during that period?
I think let's look at some fundamentals here. More so now than ever before, the ultimate goals and objectives of racers are now the ultimate goals and objectives of production car designers. Okay? Because we're all looking at different things. We're looking at lighter weight. We're looking, which involves materials. We're looking at aerodynamic advantage, which increases fuel economy, which helps designers design a look. All right? And you look at the technology transfer from different engine evolutions and designs. Racing now more so than ever before is the leader in what you're getting as a passenger car. And Corvette, I think, really sets the bar pretty high. When you look at the materials, the aerodynamic design, the engine technology that we're utilizing, getting into lubricants, the tires, rolling resistance, all those things that we're trying to achieve in racing are now directly applicable to the vehicles that you're driving. And at GM and at Chevrolet and at Corvette specifically, we try and be the tip of that technological spear. So we are really relevant. We're not only relevant because we're using a vehicle you can identify with, we're relevant because we're developing the technologies that in a year or two you're actually going to see in your vehicles.
And why wouldn't you do that? I mean, literally, any company with they have a brain would do that, because you want to have the customer understand it came from race day. That's how we all did it, right?
Absolutely.
You win on Sunday, sell on Monday. I mean, literally, what you talked about, aerodynamics, and if you look at the new NSX, that car is aesthetically beautiful, but I can tell you every surface was wind tunneled and arrowed and just to the nth degree, because you're just like, oh my God, and how do you keep the aesthetic? And I think that's what you were talking about. How do you keep it pretty?
And it goes deeper than just what you see on the surface.
Yeah, I mean,
in a race vehicle, all the cooling ducts, anything that air passes through, all gets super, super close attention, all right? And it's getting computational fluid dynamics applied to it to increase the efficiency. Think about this. If I can increase the airflow through a radiator, I can then have a smaller radiator. If I have a smaller radiator, that makes my car lighter.
That's great.
And if my car's lighter, it's going faster and it's getting better fuel economy. All these things touch each other. All of them are interlocked in this puzzle.
And you can't leave one out.
No.
That's the problem. It's not a problem. It is the solution, but you can't leave any of them out. You have to address each one of them. And, the expectation of, the regular customer is, I don't care. It just better work, and look good, I guess. But you get the people that are technical, that really know what they're buying. And then those are the ones that drive the brand, that you want to get you to buy your car.
Like I said, so much of it is unseen. No one buys a car here because it has a smaller radiator.
Exactly.
All right? But the reality is it's part of the package.
Yeah. It's a result of it won. So I think that's what's changed a lot, is that it's not disposable income, it's necessary.
I do think, though, there's the marriage between the technology that goes into a car and the fact that it has a certain look and it's an attractive thing to sit on the driveway. I mean, I once was involved in a project and I said, well, what speed do you want the car to be optimized for from an aerodynamic perspective? And the answer was 0 miles an hour because it needs to look good on the drive. But no, I think that we...
Good answer.
It needed to look good. But, today, more than ever, I think the technology that is used and is built into a modern consumer vehicle is so difficult to understand and get your head around. There's so much that people just accept. I mean, the consumer looks at the vehicle and just accepts. It's a bit like your smartphone. It's magic how it gets there. And I don't know how we bring the engineering and the what appears on the outside together and tune these things together. And I think when we look at the Michelin Challenge Design, it's a question where, okay, think about the problem, think about the solutions. Here, design something that is accessible visually to understand the solution. But then, we've got to bring the engineering into this as well. And it becomes a wider and wider, mobility is a phenomenal subject, and it is at the absolute heart of what, defines humans. We have to get around. So and is that going to change? And I think looking forward,
yes.
This is going to be, why this is actually a fascinating panel discussion, because 2030 is...
Well, plus, literally, we're talking about the car, but the event itself will evolve. And you think, what's racing in 2030? What do you go see? Is it virtual? Are you home, or do you go to Le Mans? And how do you do that? Are the cars driving upside down? Are they flying?
You've touched on a point, because Le Mans is so much more than a race.
Yeah,
because I think of those that compete at Le Mans as a family, and Ben, you've been there. We operate as a large group. We're all in the same boat. We just have our own individual oar. They started a special project a number of years ago called Garage 56. And Garage 56 was a title given to a garage where a manufacturer would bring a product that was so outside the box that it necessarily wasn't going to be competitive in the event, but it was demonstrative of where we might be in the future. And to me, that was a significant step forward in what people ordinarily viewed as just a competitive race event into now involving science and futurism. Yeah. And to me, that's the new course that racing is taking. Yeah. It's not just competition between steroidal-driven guys.
That's right.
It is.
No, you're right.
It is now truly a scientific adventure and a look into the future of where we're going to be.
And it's always been incredibly innovative. I think Le Mans has.
Yes. And I think, let's face it, Le Mans is a little different from a lot of racing.
It is.
It is very special. I think it sets itself apart completely by here we are discussing the absolute pinnacle of racing activity, and it is actually encompassed in the
Ben, a testament to that. In 2011, National Geographic, not necessarily an automobile-centric publication, declared the 24 Hours of Le Mans the greatest sporting event in the world. That's over World Cup soccer, that's over Super Bowl, that's over anything. The greatest sporting event in the world. I think that's
literally a one-day event.
Yes, a one-day event.
24 hours, if I read it right.
Yeah, one whole day. That, I think, speaks volumes to where we are right now, because it's a global event, truly international, looking at all the things we've talked about, science, technology, all the things that are integrated into it, marketing, advertising. Those that have... Has anybody been to the 24 Hours of Le Mans? Then you know what I'm talking about. From the moment you walk through that door, you know you are someplace very, very special and so different than anything you've ever witnessed before. It's not just a race. It is truly a global display of everything.
You brought up an interesting topic, Dave, which was, we talk a lot about how the cars are going to change, but, you think back to the changing of the Le Mans start, and, the race has to evolve as well, right? What do you guys see? Let's look out at 2030.
I don't see why they can't run across the track.
I think it's still kind of a smart idea, too. So, Ben, let's do this. So let's say that we're going under what we're going to call the Bowlby rules, and the Bowlby rules are set up for 2030. What would you make the rules be? If that's the first requirement, is to make sure your car suits the rules, give us an idea of what you think might be really interesting at Le Mans in 2030.
Well, you gave me a lot of time to prepare for that one. I tell you what, it's a very... Careful how I use my microphone. It's a very interesting and important point that the rules do define what occurs in a race. And so, at the very highest level, if an objective is sought, like, let's say it's the relevance to the humanities mobility, the regulations that are put in place will define what happens in the race event. Mm-hmm. And I do think that, one of the biggest challenges that we have is to say, in 2020, what is it that we're going to be searching for? I think we've been in an era where the automobile has actually been refined through a process of evolution. In strangely sort of microscopic detail, it's just been tiny, tiny incremental improvement over improvement. I think we're probably going to see a step change before very long. And so we have to understand, in racing terms, are we racing dinosaurs, or are we doing what is really interesting, which is proving and shortcutting the process of developing cars to suit, or mobility to suit, humanity's needs. And I think that you could imagine, so to your question, you could imagine a parcel of energy that you had to, the limit of your consumption. It could extend beyond the amount of energy to propel the car, but include the amount of energy to manufacture the car. And you say, well, how's this? How's that relevant? How do you know what the competition looks like? I mean, is the competition going to be an entirely electric event where the sound of motorsport has changed, beyond all recognition? These are the sorts of things that are very interesting. But what you know is that humans will decide to compete. I mean, it is in our very fundamental nature. In fact, I was speaking to Chris Baker about this very notion that, whatever it is, whether it's running to the hot dog stand and trying to get there first, or, trying to win Le Mans, it is something that we intrinsically do. And I think this is actually, it doesn't matter what we're racing, lawnmowers or extraordinary levitating cars. We will want to race, and a venue like Le Mans does lend itself to this challenge.
Dave, how do you look at the brand ambitions for a brand like Honda or Acura? And when you're looking into the future like Ben just did, to look at racing that may be different than what we understand today, is that seems like that'd be a very interesting way to kind of to navigate that.
Absolutely. And I think what happens is you're trying to, people buy cars. That's the bottom line. So what do millennials want? What's coming down the pipe? And how do you explore any of the, you do the future vase of, as you get, farther away, it spreads out like that. So are you ridiculous, or are you in this realm of realism? But the truth is that, millennials, they're on their phone. They could literally do Le Mans from their, basement. It's like, you could have 40 guys and they're lined up in pit row. They don't even get in the car. They just drive the car. And I don't know. And it's horrific to me personally, but I could see that happening. So I think the aesthetic of that then becomes, are they all equal? Are they still innovative? What do you do? And how does that permeate into your visual brand identity? And I think that from an Acura standpoint, because my role as executive creative director for Acura is, we're precision crafted performance. So performance means it's low and wide. It's got a performance stance. It feels like sporty just by looking at it. Then you do all the visual surface development, things like that speak to your brand, and then the brand identity, the front end, whatever it is. But I think that ultimately it's the proportion of racing is low and wide. It's drag, it's handling, it's all of those things, the performance aspect. So that is always going to be a given from an enthusiast point of view. And we can do that as one brand. Within the Honda realm, there's a lot of different styles of cars. There's economy cars, there's little K cars, there's CUVs. So you pick and choose. You want them all to feel sporty, I guess. But from a brand standpoint, the Le Mans cars and any race car, you want it to have the aesthetic that you want to embody to the public. That this is who we are. We put this car out here. This is who we are. And I think that there's some that do it better than others, for sure. And I think that they're kind of the roadmap. But I think for these guys, when we start judging this, it's going to be exactly what you said. Is how realistic it is. Not realistic from a futuristic standpoint, but will it work? I mean, it's like, dude, who would have thought of that? But I'm hoping that there's some. Right now all the technology is going into the car with regenerative braking, and that definitely who would have thought an electric car would win, anything.
Right.
And I think that now, that the dinosaur era or the electric car era is that they're crossing paths right now, and it's acceptable to be an electric car now. You mentioned the sound, but I had slot cars growing up. It was cool sound. I was like, it stops and goes. Like, this is cool. So I could see that happening.
You guys have talked about racing, Doug specifically, you talked about racing feeding the production vehicle. But in some of these movements, like toward electrification and autonomy and this sort of thing, it feels like there's also some production needs feeding the racing vehicle as well. Can you give some examples of that?
Well, we kind of come full circle. What Dave was saying, the electric car was pretty cool in 1892.
Yeah.
Hub-mounted motors and everything.
Yeah. So, we started there, and now we're kind of moving back to it. It wasn't that long ago when we thought instant communication was a pager. Okay? I remember that was just a huge breakthrough. You had a pager. So you could, quickly pull over into a service station, find a payphone, drop a quarter in, and make the communication.
What's a pay?
We are moving so quickly now. It's not a linear acceleration. It's an exponential acceleration to how fast technology is happening. I mean, they're building a huge battery plant out in Arizona. By the time it's done, the technology that it was intended to will be antique. I mean, in 3 years, we've moved past that. Let's look at history a little bit, because I like to look back myself and try and figure out where we were, and then that kind of helps me figure out where we might be going. Some of the greatest racing we ever saw, if you look at the era of Indy, where you had front-engine, four-cylinder, turbocharged Offenhausers. You had the advent of the rear-engine car, small displacement V8s. You had gas turbine cars. You had Smokey Yunick with a side pod driver and an engine in the other side. They're all competing against one another. That level of creativity, I think, served as a great foundation for people to understand how free thinking could influence automotive design. That it wasn't just a chassis you used for 10 years and every year you redid the sheet metal. All right? That was just simply an aesthetic. You were selling cars on aesthetic. Now we've moved past to where it's now technology has played a huge role. How well am I going to be interconnected in my car? Can my 6 kids in my Tahoe all get on their iPhone together? I mean, it's a whole new world out there that racing kind of embodies that, and it moves quickly. So does the technology that we're developing and then implementing into road cars. Where we're going to be in 2030 is an absolute mystery to me. I don't know where it's going to be. You look at warfare today. Warfare is conducted now with no people.
That's what I mean.
And so is it logical?
Also,
that because safety becomes such a huge element of this, that the decision is made somewhere between now and 2030 that it's too dangerous to have humans involved in it other than running the joystick. And maybe we're able to look at all kinds of wild advancement in vehicles because they become expendable, all right? Which then opens the door. It opens a whole new freedom in what you can do and try. And that's how development is done, almost drone-like development. That's pretty exciting. It gets away from the human side of it, which I find a little disturbing. But that doesn't mean they can't exist on parallel paths either. So, at 2030, I'll be lucky to be wearing a diaper. But
I bet it'll say Corvette on it if it does.
It will be yellow.
That's right.
Painted yellow. The reality of that is, I'm very
for more
excited.
reasons than one. Right?
Yeah, the reality of that, I'm going to be very excited to see where we are, and I can't be, thinking of myself as the ultimate soothsayer. Things move so quickly.
Well, and that's it. You said parallel. So how do you do that?
Yeah.
That's the transition's going to be huge. Yep. How do you do it even on the road? So you have autonomous driving. Go get my groceries, whatever it is. And how do you do that with the people that want to still drive and be enthusiastic?
Exactly. It's two parallel paths.
It is.
Well, actually, that is a very important point, because there are the so-called petrol heads who love the engineering, the pleasure that mobility, just the process of going somewhere, not the arriving. It's just it's actually the journey, right? That is so important. And I think who knows if that is even going to be possible to enjoy. I mean, our roads, imagine roads full of autonomous
Special
vehicles
lane.
that are absolutely locked in format, and you're trying to weave your way through it. I mean, you're done.
It'd be fun.
But you know, I mean, my own kids, I've got I've got 3 children now with licenses, and the 2 oldest are boys, and I'm amazed that I haven't had to read them the Riot Act over speeding, being reckless drivers. They're not at all. They're
Safety
responsible drivers. It's been hammered into them, and the vehicles that they buy have airbags and safety belts.
Certainly rational.
It's a very, very different mindset. I mean, I was a lunatic.
You still are.
You've touched on a good point. Somewhere around 50% of 19-year-olds today don't have a driver's license.
Yeah.
Nor do they have any interest.
It's critical.
Nor do they have any interest in getting one, which doesn't portend well for those of us that manufacture vehicles for driving purposes, at least on an individual basis. You look at today's world is just 2 thumbs. I don't ever have to look up. I can Uber my car, pull up in front. I might have to look, see if he's there, if he doesn't honk. I can get in, I can arrange for the payment, I can send them my destination, I can get to where I'm going, or I can sit around with my buddies, and we'll be doing this. That's the idea of communication. And then when it's time to go, I run through that process again.
But I like it frees me up to go drive ridiculous.
Yeah, well, I was saying, but half of youth today don't care what color it is. They don't care what shape it is. They don't care how fast it goes. Will it get there? Will I be comfortable while I'm in it, and is it relatively safe? Well, that's a dynamic that we have to deal with every day.
All the time. Mm-hmm. But I think there will be a rat rod lane, of like rebellious people that
dream cruise.
And you look at these guys are building these cars that are in their 20s or even younger, and you think there's hope. But it's a different aesthetic. But and that's why if you could connect them to this, like you say, look, there's this race in France that. You run what you brung, or it's kind of it hasn't become this complete manufacturing event. There's still people that can show up with their 911 or something and drive.
What's interesting, as manufacturers, we never had a challenge to get people to try a new vegetable.
Exactly.
Okay, everybody ate vegetables. Yeah. I mean, everybody always bought cars. Now it's a question: do I ever have to buy one? We've never really been faced, as a universe of manufacturers, we've never been faced with that problem before. Everybody had to have one. Well, guess what? Now that's not the case.
Yeah, that's right.
I was just in Long Beach. We were racing out there. I had an executive that used to be my boss, who was retired, who lives out there now, lives in that area, in Newport Beach. And he says, I'm living on my retirement income. He says, it's just my wife and myself. He says, I'm giving real consideration. This is a Detroit guy whose dad worked for General Motors. He says, I'm giving some real consideration to us only owning one car. I said, Steve, you got to be kidding me. He says, no. He says, think about it. For what it cost me for the car, for the insurance and the hassle, he says, if we only have one vehicle in our house between the two of us, I can just Uber myself if I want to go to a game or head someplace or even come to the racetrack. He says, I don't really need 2 cars. This is a guy who grew up, his whole life was spent in this industry, who is now thinking, I don't really need a car.
Does that make racing more important then?
Wildly more important.
Because
I think that's what we're saying.
Your brain.
Yes, it does.
We need, as manufacturer, our own survival is dependent on generating interest in personally owned mobility.
Right.
The car, as it evolved, I mean, when Henry Ford came up, mobility was his whole deal. Yeah. He knew that was
for
the
everybody.
Breakthrough. As Eisenhower knew that interstate roadways would build our nation, Ford knew that the independence that someone could achieve by having their own personal mobility, as Bennett pointed out, and we've moved
the freedom.
We've moved through that to where it was a status symbol. If you had a new Cadillac sitting in your driveway, I mean, you were pretty proud of that. It said you worked hard, you achieved something. I mean, I'm just seeing that kind of dropping off a little bit. That maybe it's not that important to younger generation. We need to continue to fan the flame of excitement. That just as you would go shopping for an article of clothing that was important to your work and to your personal life.
Clothing is still important, and so you
reasonably
think
so.
Yeah, and so you think that.
So that same thing is where the automobile is going, which it never had to. It never had to fight for that turf before.
So
now it is.
If you had to pick one of the two, Doug, that racing improves the breed by feeding it with technological advancement, or it improves the brand by defining and elevating what you're capable of. Could you ever separate those two, or are those two so intertwined?
Those are inextricably joined.
Yeah.
They are one.
Yep.
Yeah.
They are one. They truly are one.
You're racing because of the brand.
So if that's true, what brands do you guys think? So right now there's of course there's 12
Probably
different
Corvette.
manufacturers currently at Le Mans, but there are a lot of manufacturers that aren't at Le Mans. Who do you see coming on the scene next? You know, who do you see that could either get the technological push or the elevation of the brand, or both? I mean, or would it be somebody that we've never heard of? I mean, do you think it'd be someone that's not a car manufacturer today?
Sure.
Yeah.
Apple, you mean?
Yeah.
Tesla could do it.
I mean, I think, actually, whilst you guys are thinking about that, one thing that I think, yes, there's the brand and the technology story, but one thing that racing delivers is credibility. And it's something that is very, and I think this is a multifaceted point, because the race itself has to be an authentic and consistent event that winning delivers credibility, but also the participation against other manufacturers or individuals, car companies, it is a way to prove something. And so I think that it might be that racing will change in 2030. Again, still searching for credibility, but to give credibility to a new way of being mobile. And so I do think that there is, it isn't unthinkable that there won't be living people in the car. I mean, brain dead, maybe. No. What I mean is that it may be that they will be somewhat
It's
grown.
really hard to fathom, isn't it?
It's like, what's wrong with Uber? There's only one problem with Uber, is that there's a human driving it, right? Because if it was literally you dialed it in, it came and it went and the rest of it, you wouldn't have the problem of the unreliable human. And so, okay, here's the machines taking over the world.
Yeah.
I think so. So for me, the credibility issue coming at racing from two angles is actually very central. And I think that racing's credibility is in the hands of whoever it is who wants to race. And, so we've got to have high-level event at Le Mans if it's to be an event that people attend. And it will deliver credibility to these new companies that want to come on. Or the establishment. I mean, goodness knows, people like Corvette and Audi have Porsche in the past have owned Le Mans and derived enormous credibility from what happens there.
Sure.
I mean, even internally within the company,
I'm driving that. I mean, that's what it was. I'm driving that.
Well, and Ben, it takes us back to your question: what manufacturers do we see coming?
Yeah.
History repeating itself. How about Ford? Ford is now back at Le Mans.
Right.
But think about this. They're not just coming back. It's two-phased. They're not just coming back because they want the marketing aspect of it. They're coming back because they have designed and are building a rather unique vehicle, mass-produced vehicle. It's all composite tub, new materials, new aero, new design challenges, new power plant, Ecotec engine.
Yep.
All right, they've seen what you can do on the marketing side, and that challenges their design side to come up with something that can compete. And so they're able to play one off the other, which raises their boat. I mean, they make themselves better by competing. And that's what Le Mans represents, because it is the ultimate battleground.
It proves the car.
Yep.
It does. I mean, it literally is.
I can't think of a better quote, Doug, to wrap up this kind of free-form discussion than Le Mans being the ultimate battleground. So, I mean, that's perfect.
Michelin, a better way forward.